Eliza dragged my work shirts across the porch rail one by one and pitched them into the yard like she'd been waiting 11 years for the moment. "Aaron says men like you confuse stress with ambition," she said. "Get out of my house." I laughed. I actually laughed. Then I picked up the divorce papers she'd slapped on the hood of her SUV, signed every page without blinking, and held out a second envelope I'd been carrying since that morning. She looked at it like it was a trick. "What is that?" "Read it," I said. She tore it open. Her face did something I'd never seen it do in 11 years of marriage. It went completely blank. "Your notice to vacate," I said. "You want it out. That's where you start." I stepped back inside after she threw the last shirt. The yard looked like a yard sale nobody planned. Eliza stood on the porch with her arms crossed, wearing the expression she saved for customers she thought were wasting her time. "I'm Grant, 42 years old, and I run the used car dealership my father started on the east side of Tulsa back in '94. Eliza and I had been married for 11 years. She came to work at the lot about 3 years in, handling title paperwork and managing office flow, and she was good at it, I'll give her that. We lived in a duplex that had been in my family since before I was born, the kind of place with original wood floors and a cracked front step nobody ever fixed. She'd always called it temporary. I'd always called it home. For the past 2 years, since my father got sick and handed me the keys to everything, I'd lived like the dealership was the only thing keeping the ground under my feet. I missed dinners. Missed our anniversary twice. Fell asleep in the finance office more times than I can count. Eliza stopped asking where I was. And somewhere in that silence, something between us broke into pieces so small neither of us bothered picking them up. The rot showed at the dealership before it showed at home. We had a competitor about 6 miles up the road, a newer lot called Peak Motor Group, and they started undercutting us in ways that made no sense. A customer would come to us for a trade-in value, leave without buying, and show up at Peak the next week with a deal that was weirdly close to what we'd offered. Then our finance reserve margins, numbers that lived inside our internal system and nowhere else, started matching up with pricing tricks Peak was using on the same customer types we were losing. I pulled the last 8 months of competitor data and cross-referenced it against our own closed and lost deals. The pattern was clean and ugly. Somebody on my lot was talking. I had 5 full-time salespeople, a finance manager named Holt, and Eliza, who had access to everything because she ran the back office. I didn't want to believe it was anyone I knew. I definitely did not want to believe it was her, but I also was not going to set the building on fire to figure out which wall had the leak. I needed something smarter. I needed somebody on the inside who was not actually on the inside. A contact of mine from a dealer network in Oklahoma City told me about a guy named Aaron who did exactly what I needed. Not a private investigator, not law enforcement. An actor. Former used car salesman, 4 years in regional theater, currently doing contract work for dealerships that suspected internal leaks. The pitch was simple. Aaron would walk in cold, play a flashy millionaire buyer from Dallas with cash talk and loose conversation about possibly investing, and see who tried to impress him with information they had no business sharing. I called Aaron on a Tuesday. He picked up on the second ring. "You want the full package or just the buyer?" he asked. "Full package," I said. "I need to know exactly who's selling me out and how far they've taken it." He said he'd need a week to prepare, a cover story, access to the lot's public-facing info, and a flat daily rate plus a written agreement. My lawyer had it drafted by Thursday. The cover story was clean. Aaron would play a Dallas-based buyer named Derek, who'd sold 2 medical supply companies and was looking to diversify into automotive retail. Cash buyer. Possible minority investor. The kind of client that made sales managers stand up straight. I told nobody at the lot, not even Holt. Aaron walked onto the lot the following Monday morning like he owned the air he breathed. I watched from the service bay window. He drove a rented black SUV, wore a belt that probably cost more than my first car, and moved slowly, the way rich people move when they are not in a hurry, because they do not have to be. Holt spotted him first and practically sprinted across the asphalt. I could see them talking. Holt gesturing toward the newer inventory, Aaron nodding like he was only half interested. That was exactly right. Real big buyers do not ask a lot of questions. They make you talk to fill the silence. Within 20 minutes, Holt had brought him inside. I had a small audio device in the private sales office, legally placed under Oklahoma law since I owned the property. My lawyer had signed off on it. Aaron also carried a micro recorder in his jacket lapel as backup. I went back to my desk and pulled up a quote for a wholesaler and pretended to work. I was listening to every word through one earbud, my coffee going cold, my hands flat on the desk, waiting for the first mistake. Holt went right for the soft spots. He told Aaron our lot cleared an average of 62 units a month, which was close but high. He told him our finance reserve averaged around 900 per deal, which was accurate and not public information. He talked about our floor plan cost and our service absorption rate, all of it coming out smooth and fast, like he had rehearsed it. Aaron stayed calm, tossed out a question here and there, then said he wanted to see the back office. Holt should have stopped right there. He did not. He walked Aaron straight past my office, down the hall, and into the administrative area where Eliza was sitting at her desk. I heard Holt say, "This is Eliza, she runs our numbers." Then I heard Aaron say, "Very easy, very relaxed. I like knowing who actually keeps the lights on." Eliza laughed. I had not heard that laugh from her in a long time. "Holt's going to show you a lot of things," she said. "Just know that some of them are the polished version." Aaron said, "What's the real version?" There was a pause on the recording. Then she said, "Depends on how serious you are about this." I pressed the earbud in harder and kept completely still. By the afternoon, Eliza had done things I had never seen her do for a walk-in buyer. She made Aaron a fresh cup of coffee from the good machine she kept in her personal cabinet, not the counterpot in the waiting area. She opened the private conference room we only used for bank reps and fleet buyers. She told Aaron which salesman to request and which one to avoid, naming one of my guys by first name with a small shake of her head like it was just casual conversation. Then she leaned against the doorframe and said, "Grant's brilliant with the mechanical side. The vision piece, that's where things get a little stuck." Aaron said, "That's usually how it goes. One guy builds it, takes forever to let go." Eliza said, "Exactly. You get it because you've actually built something." She was talking to him like he was the only rich man who'd ever walked in and actually understood the room. I stepped out of the service bay and walked down the hall. I pushed the conference room door open. Aaron looked up, completely relaxed, because he was ready for this. Eliza looked up too, and her expression shifted just slightly. "You're crossing a line," I said to her. She did not flinch. "No," she said. "I'm finally talking to someone who thinks bigger than this lot." She smiled at Aaron. Aaron looked down at his coffee cup. I walked back to my office and shut the door without slamming it. That mattered. I did not want her to know how far under my skin that conversation had gotten. I pulled up the audio file from the morning and listened to the conference room segment again. Eliza's tone with Aaron was different from her tone with anyone else at that lot. Lighter, sharper, more alive. She was performing for him, but it was not pure flirtation. It was something closer to ambition, like she was showing him a version of herself that had been sitting in storage for a long time. That stung in a way I had not expected. Not because she was warm with a stranger. Because she had not been warm with me in so long I had stopped noticing the cold. I called Aaron at 6 that evening. He picked up and said before I could speak, "She's not just being friendly." "I know," I said. "She told me she could help a serious buyer get favorable terms if the timing was right and the current ownership got squeezed," he said. Didn't say it directly. But she said enough. I sat with that for a moment. "Did she offer anything concrete?" "Not yet," Aaron said, "but she's circling it." 2 days later, Aaron came back. Same unhurried pace across the lot. Same easy confidence. Holt met him at the door, but Eliza was already in the hallway. She had seen his SUV from her desk window. She walked Holt away with a comment about a title issue that needed his signature, and I heard her do it through the device in the hall. It was smooth. She had Aaron alone in the conference room within 10 minutes. I sat at my desk with both earbuds in. Eliza's voice came through clear. She told Aaron that the lot's best month in the last 2 years was documented in a specific folder on our shared drive. She described exactly where it was. She told him the folder had the finance breakdown, the gross per unit, and the holdback summaries. Then she said, if someone with real capital came in and made Grant an offer he couldn't refuse, I could make sure the transition was organized from day one, Aaron said. And if he refused? Eliza paused. Then she said, he won't. He's tired, even if he doesn't know it yet. I hit stop on the recording and sat back in the chair. She was not running from the marriage. She was running towards something else, and she had already been planning the route for a while. I had my lawyer pull the employment agreement Eliza had signed when she joined the lot officially 6 years ago. There was a confidentiality clause. Not airtight, but it was there. It covered internal financial data, customer lists, and proprietary pricing strategies. What she had described to Aaron, the location of specific financial folders, the structure of our holdback summaries, the breakdown of monthly gross, all of that was protected information. My lawyer's name was Petra, and she had been handling business and family law in Tulsa for 20 years. I called her that same afternoon. Is what she did actionable? I asked. Petra said, depends on whether she followed through. Describing the location of a file to a potential investor is gray. Sending or sharing those files crosses the line. Then I need to know if she sent anything. I said. Petra told me to talk to my IT guy. His name was Bram, 26, handled all our network security on contract. I called him that evening and asked him to pull the outgoing file transfer logs for Eliza's workstation for the last 90 days. He called me back the next morning. His voice was careful. You want the list? He said. Start from the top, I said. Bram's list was 2 pages. Most of it was routine. Title docs, DMV submissions, vendor invoices. But 4 files stood out. They had been sent from Eliza's work email to a Gmail address I did not recognize. 2 were month-end gross summaries. 1 was a customer loyalty breakdown with full deal history attached. The last one was a competitive analysis, a file I had personally built to track how we priced against Peak Motor Group. That file was never meant to leave the building. I forwarded everything to Petra. Then I called Aaron and asked him to meet me off the lot at a diner on Sheridan. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a back booth with a notebook and a plain cup of coffee. He slid the notebook across the table without a word. His full report. Holt had taken the bait on day 1, offering confidential numbers and inside access exactly as I had feared. I turned the page. Eliza's section was longer. Aaron had documented every interaction, with timestamps, quoted dialogue pulled from his recordings, and a summary line at the bottom. It read, subject appeared to be operating with a long-term plan, not a momentary lapse. I set the notebook down. How long do you think she's been at this? Aaron said, long enough to know which files to point to. I had Bram trace the Gmail address. It was not hard. The account was registered under a name I did not know, but the recovery email attached to it was a personal account in Eliza's name. The same address she used for our joint electric bill. I sat in my office a long time after Bram told me that, not out of shock. The shock had already passed somewhere between Aaron's first report and the second visit. What I felt now was something flatter, cleaner, like a problem that had finally stopped hiding its shape. I called Petra again. She sent protected files to herself using a ghost account registered under her own backup email. Petra said, that is not gray anymore. Then I did something that took me 2 extra days to decide on. I looked up Peak Motor Group's job listings. They had 1 active posting, Senior Office Manager, Commercial Dealership Experience Preferred, posted 43 days ago. I pulled Eliza's office computer logs, which I had legal access to as the business owner. She had visited the Peak Motor Group careers page 11 times in the last 6 weeks. She had also sent a document to that same Gmail address that matched the file size of a resume. She was already gone in every way that mattered. The clothes on the lawn were just the last sentence of something she had been writing for months. I did not confront her, not yet. I went home that night and ate the dinner she had made, chicken and rice, and I listened to her talk about a title problem on a fleet deal, and I nodded, and I kept my face as still as I could. She was good at reading me, always had been, so I gave her nothing to read. After dinner, I told her I needed to go over some floor plan paperwork and sat at the kitchen table with actual paperwork in front of me while she watched television in the other room. I heard her laugh at something on the screen. I had not made her laugh like that in 2 years, maybe longer. I was not going to pretend that was only her fault. The dealership had swallowed me whole after my father's diagnosis, and I had let it. I chose invoices over dinners, conference calls over anniversaries, and I had told myself she understood because she worked the same lot. But understanding is not the same as being okay with something. I knew that. I just had not wanted to know it while it was happening. The next morning, I called Petra and told her to start drafting a notice to vacate based on the prenup's property separation clause. "You're moving fast," she said. "She already moved," I said. Petra had the notice ready in 3 days. The prenup was specific. The duplex was held in my family's property trust, established before our marriage and never transferred jointly. The prenup documented it clearly as separate property. When Eliza locked me out 2 weeks later after a fight about a missed dinner and told me to sleep at the lot, she triggered the abandonment clause in the lease agreement I held as trustee. Petra said we were on solid ground. I kept the notice in a sealed envelope in my truck. I told Erin to hold one more visit in reserve. If she offers anything else, anything at all, get it on record, I said. Erin asked, "What's your end goal here?" "I want her to have made her choice completely and clearly before I hand her the paper," I said. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Some people would say you should have just had a conversation. Some people haven't pulled their company's private files off a ghost account registered in their wife's backup email," I said. He did not argue with that. He just said, "I'll go back Thursday." I said fine, then drove back to the lot, unlocked the side door with the key I had carried since I was 19, and sat down at my father's old desk. The fights got bad in the final week. Not loud, exactly, but mean. The kind of mean that comes from two people who have already decided it is over, but have not said it out loud yet. "You inherited a dealership and still act like a victim," Eliza said one evening. "We built this together," I said. She turned from the kitchen counter and looked at me like I had said something embarrassing. "No," she said. "I held it together while you slept in the finance office. You had access to everything, because I trusted you," I said. She laughed at that, short and sharp. "Access. That's what you're proud of. That's the marriage. Access." I did not answer. She grabbed her keys off the counter. "You know what your problem is, Grant? You think loyalty and proximity are the same thing." She walked out. I heard her car back out of the driveway. I sat down at the kitchen table and looked at the wall. The notice to vacate was still in my truck. The file Petra had been building was thick now. Erin's documentation, Bram's transfer logs, the employment agreement with the confidentiality clause. All of it organized, time-stamped, and ready. I was not angry anymore. Anger had burned off weeks ago. What was left was something steadier. She came home late. I heard the front door open, and her keys hit the bowl on the entryway table. I was already in bed, not asleep, just lying there in the dark. She came to the bedroom doorway and stood there a moment. Then she said, "I want you to move out." I said, "Is that right?" She said, "I've been patient, Grant, for years. And you haven't changed and you're not going to change, and I am done waiting for something that's never coming." I did not move. She walked to the closet and pulled out 3 of my work shirts on their hangers. "Erin says men like you confuse stress with ambition." I sat up slowly. "Erin said that." She nodded like it was a settled thing. "He sees it clearly because he's not stuck in the middle of it. He's rich, Grant. Actually rich. Not this." She waved her hand at the room. "I found a real man who can provide. Get out of my house." She walked to the front door and I heard the hangers hit the porch rail. Then she came back for more. 3 more trips. Until she had pulled everything out that was mine, I got up and stood in the doorway. She turned around and held out a stapled set of papers. "I had these drawn up last week," she said. "Divorce papers." Her hands were completely steady. Mine were too. I took the papers from her and carried them to the kitchen. I laid them flat on the counter under the light. I did not read every line. I knew what they were. I found the signature lines, all 3 of them, and signed each one in clean, slow strokes. She had followed me in and stood in the doorway watching. I capped the pen and held the papers out. She did not take them right away. "That's it?" she said. Her voice had gone quiet. "That's it," I said. She took them. She flipped through the pages like she expected to find something different, something crossed out or conditional. There was nothing. Just my signatures. She looked up. "You're not going to fight this?" Not a question. "No," I said. I reached past her to the counter where I had set my keys when I came in. Beside them sat the sealed envelope that had been waiting there all week. She watched me pick it up and hold it out. She did not move for a moment. "What is that?" she said. "Open it," I said. She took it the way you take something from someone when you are not sure if it is a gift or a trap. She pulled the flap open slowly. She unfolded the paper. I watched her eyes track the first line. "This is a notice to vacate," she said. Her voice was flat, like she was reading a weather report. 30 days, I said. "The duplex is held in my family trust. It always has been. You've known that since before we got married." She looked up from the paper. "You can't do this." "Petra drafted it this morning," I said. "We're on solid legal ground." Eliza set the paper on the counter very carefully, like she was making a point about her own composure. "You had this ready," she said, "before I even gave you the divorce papers." "I had it ready after you locked me out 2 weeks ago," I said. "That triggered the lease clause." Her expression shifted. Not quite anger, something more like recalculation. Then she stood straighter and lifted her chin. "It doesn't matter," she said. "Aaron's taking me somewhere better than this." I looked at her for a moment. "You should probably ask him where he's actually going," I said. She held my eyes. "What does that mean?" I reached over and picked up my phone and sent one text. Then I looked back at her. "He'll be here in about 10 minutes," I said. She crossed her arms and smiled like she had already won a hand I had not even dealt yet. We stood in the kitchen without talking. The clock above the stove moved. Outside, I heard a car turn down the block. Then headlights swept across the kitchen window. 2 doors closed. Eliza heard it too. She moved to the front window and looked out. Her posture shifted, that familiar lift in the shoulders, the slight angle forward, the way she stood when she was about to present herself. The porch light clicked on from the motion sensor. 2 figures came up the front walk. I watched her face. She was smiling, barely, just at the corners. She reached for the door handle before they could knock and pulled it open. Aaron stood on the porch in a plain gray jacket and dark jeans, no designer belt. No rental SUV in the driveway. A plain pickup sat at the curb. The woman beside him was carrying a file folder and a small recorder. Her name was Nora, and she worked for a business compliance firm in Tulsa that Petra had connected me with 2 weeks earlier. Eliza looked at Aaron. Her smile held for a half second, maybe a full second. Long enough for her to believe it was still the right expression. Then she looked at the folder in Nora's hand, and the smile stopped. Eliza looked at Aaron. Her voice came out controlled, almost careful. "I thought you were coming alone," Aaron said. "I never said that." She looked at Nora's folder. "Who is she?" "My name is Nora Finch," Nora said. "I work in business compliance. I've been reviewing documentation related to the transfer of protected financial records from Grant's dealership." Eliza's attention snapped back to Aaron. You work for him. Not a question. Just a sentence landing. Aaron did not flinch. I was hired to play a millionaire buyer and identify how confidential financial information was leaving the lot. He paused. You weren't the only one. But you went further than anyone else. Eliza turned to me. I was standing in the kitchen doorway. Her expression had moved through anger and come out the other side into something colder. You set me up, she said. I stepped forward. You described the location of protected folders to a stranger you met twice, I said. You sent copies of our month-end numbers to a personal ghost account registered in your own name. I didn't set that up. You did. She looked back at Nora. This is harassment, Nora said, evenly. No. It's documentation. There's a difference. Nora opened the folder and placed 2 printed pages on the entryway table. Email logs. Timestamps. File names. Eliza looked at the pages on the table. She did not pick them up. Her arms were crossed tight across her chest, and she was staring at those email logs the way someone stares at a bill they have been avoiding, already knowing the number before they read it. Nora said, We're not involving law enforcement tonight. But the documentation has been preserved. Whether that changes depends on how the next steps go. Eliza looked at me. Her voice dropped low. You used me. I walked to the entryway and picked up the notice to vacate from the counter where she had set it down. I held it out to her. No, I said. I caught up to you. She did not take the paper right away. Her hand came up slowly, and she pressed it flat against her sternum, the way people do when they are trying to hold something in. Nora asked for the office keys in a quiet voice. Eliza stood still for a moment. Then she reached into her bag, unclipped the lanyard, and set the key ring on the table next to the email logs. She did not slam it down, she just set it there. I held the notice out one more time. She took it. You want it out, I said. Start with this address. She turned and walked through the front door. I stood there until her car started, until the headlights swept the window, until the street went quiet. If you stayed for all 20 chapters, drop a comment below. Have you ever poured everything into something, stayed loyal through all of it, only to find out someone was already writing their exit plan the whole time? What would you have done differently?